What's up, guys? Steve here with Climb the Pocket, back with another fantasy football video for you. Today we're going over the top 40 running backs and why you should fade each and every single one of them. Now, obviously, we're going RB early and often this year, so you're not going to avoid these guys in drafts, but this is something to put in the back of your mind come draft day when you come across a player in a draft and why, you might not want to draft him. So let's go ahead and get started, but before we do, if you're new to the channel, why don't you give us a subscription if you like our content? We really appreciate it. It helps us grow. Liking that video helps us grow, and dropping a comment, we will definitely respond to every single comment. I'd like to see which running backs you're fading. So let's get into the video. Number one, obviously it's going to be very tough to point out flaws of Christian McCaffrey, but hey, that's what we're doing in the video. So the downsides of Christian McCaffrey, maybe his workload decreases from last year. He had a historic season, just second overall fantasy football player behind Lamar Jackson, who also had a very, very good season. Christian McCaffrey, maybe his workload goes down with a new coach. They have a new scheme. Maybe the team isn't very good. Maybe Teddy Bridgewater likes to get DJ Moore and some of the other receivers more involved. Overall, I don't really see that happening. So Christian McCaffrey is pretty safe, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind that his workload could decrease. Moving on to Saquon Barkley at number 2. Saquon Barkley has dealt with some injuries over his first 2 years, and that's something to think about. But also, this Giants offense has a lot of other mouths to feed, and if Saquon isn't the absolute focal point, which I think he will personally be, but if he isn't, there's going to be a lot of other mouths to feed with Daniel Jones on the rise, and honestly, their defense isn't really good, so the offense might not be able to be on the field that often. So that's something to think about when taking Saquon Barkley second overall. Third overall, we have Ezekiel Elliott. Ezekiel Elliott is one of the safest running backs in fantasy football, so there's not too many downsides, but over the past few years, he just hasn't gotten the amount of goal line carries that we'd like to see, and Dak Prescott likes to make it work in the red zone, and there's a lot of mouths to feed there too, and Dak Prescott likes to make a lot of the work happen on his own. So Ezekiel Elliott, definitely very safe. He's going to get 20 carries a game, which is very, very good, but something to think about that maybe Ezekiel Elliott should get used a little more often at the goal line. So not too much, like I said, very safe, so it's kind of hard to make a case for Ezekiel Elliott. Alvin Kamara. Touchdowns. Last year's touchdowns were way down from 2018, and that's obviously something to be afraid about. Latavius Murray, in his absence, was pretty solid, so maybe they want to get Latavius Murray a little more involved. They bring in Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders takes a lot of the targets. Alvin Kamara is still going to get his. He's definitely one of the best pass-catching running backs in the NFL, but hey, maybe they want to spread the ball a little bit more around. Drew Brees is coming in the end of his career, and maybe he wants to throw the ball a little more downfield. So Alvin Kamara, number 4. Number 5, Dalvin Cook. Obviously, this one is very obvious. His holdout, right as of right now, Dalvin Cook is moving down draft boards because we do not know if he is going to hold out. I personally think he gets signed, but even if he does sign and play the entire season, he obviously has huge injury risk. A guy you're taking this early in drafts, if he gets injured or goes down early, it could be a huge detriment to your team, and Dalvin Cook hasn't played in a fantasy championship for you, so something to think about on draft day. Moving on, Derrick Henry just signed a monster deal with the Tennessee Titans. One of the safer backs with Ezekiel Elliott, going to get tons of work, going to get all the goal line carries, but his downside is probably going to return under 20 catches in the season, especially since they drafted Darrington Evans this year, and he's more of a scat back, more of a third down role. So we'll see. Derrick Henry, not too much upside in PPR, but definitely still a top 10 running back. Joe Mixon for the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Mixon also threatening a holdout until we know more. Right now, his ADP is probably going down a little bit. I think if he does sign a deal, he goes up, but right now, kind of risky to take him in drafts. Also, Joe Burrow's in town. They have a rookie quarterback. We don't really know what that offense is going to look like. The second year of the head coach, definitely, we're interested to see what that looks like. But Joe Mixon right now, some people say he peaked. I don't know if he peaked. I personally am a big Joe Mixon fan, but there's some questions around him. Nick Chubb for the Cleveland Browns. The big one here is Kareem Hunt is there in the final 8 games of the season. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt were pretty much pacing at pretty equal value at the RB position. He's not involved in the passing game. Even though we know he can catch passes, he's not involved when Kareem Hunt is there. They want to use Kareem Hunt as their pretty much their third wide receiver. So they run a lot of 2 running back sets. Kareem Hunt's probably going to steal a lot of the goal line carries, which I don't like. I think Nick Chubb is one of the best running backs in the NFL and definitely should. But it's something to think about. Kareem Hunt is there. Nick Chubb getting his workload eaten into. Josh Jacobs for the Las Vegas Raiders. The downside is that, once again, he doesn't have that much PPR upside because they did draft Lynn Bowden and they signed Jalen Richard back to the team. So obviously, Josh Jacobs, we know he can catch passes out of the backfield, but he's still going to receive a lot of carries, which is great. He's going to be pretty safe, but his work in the passing game is definitely going to be limited. Aaron Jones, touchdown regression is coming. He had 19 touchdowns last year, 22 if you put in the playoffs. Over his career, he's definitely been one of the more efficient backs, and he definitely gets into the end zone like crazy, but they did draft A.J. Dillon. They didn't draft any other wide receivers, which is good for him if they want to use him in the passing game, but drafting A.J. Dillon means that the team wants to go to a more running attack, which is good for Aaron Jones, but they already have Jamal Williams there. He's pretty decent, and they bring in A.J. Dillon. They obviously want to get him worked in, so does Aaron Jones, does he go down? We've obviously been saying free Aaron Jones for a while now, and it happened last year, but will he go back down? Did he peak last year? He was RB2 last year. Don't think he's going to return RB2 value this year. Kenyon Drake for the Arizona Cardinals. He was very good after coming over from Miami, but a lot of people kind of just look at the high points and not the low points. He was very, very inefficient. He had some really bad games, and he had some very great games. We don't know what the consistency of Kenyon Drake is, and he's going very early in drafts, early round 2, possibly late round 1 for some people who are desperate to get an RB1 on their team. So there's a risk, and they also bring in DeAndre Hopkins. So there's going to be a lot of targets to him, and maybe the passing offense is a lot more involved than the running offense on this team. So we'll see. Miles Sanders for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I don't believe this one, but a lot of people think that Doug Peterson loves a committee, and definitely that's true. We hear that they're talking about trying to sign a veteran. Why can't they just give Miles Sanders the ball? They want to sign a veteran. They want someone to be mixed in. Boston Scott's there. We saw him at the end of the year last year. He played pretty good. So if they mix that in, it's going to eat into Miles Sanders' workload. Now he's a first-round pick, end of the first round in a lot of mock drafts I'm doing. So definitely some risk. Austin Eckler, one of the more successful running backs last year, with a very minimal amount of carries compared to the rest of the top RBs in the field. He's going to get his work in the passing game, no doubt. They did draft Joshua Kelly in the draft, and I think he will definitely eat some of those vacated carries from Melvin Gordon leaving. Justin Jackson's still there. So we don't necessarily know the identity of this team's running game. If Austin Eckler is still going to be used as a primary weapon in this offense, and maybe not get 250 carries like we want him to get. He's still going to be very involved in the passing offense, but we don't know the identity of the rushing offense yet. Let's go ahead and move on to Leonard Fournette for the Jaguars. Leonard Fournette, just before last season, he played every game last season, but a couple seasons before, we were just talking about how he's one of the more injury-prone running backs in the league, and I don't think he's completely out of the clear zone just because he got through an entire season last year. I think Leonard Fournette definitely still has injury issues. Those hamstrings could flare up at any single time. And obviously very involved in the passing offense last year, over 70 catches. I just don't see that happening again. They have Raquel Armstead. I think they want to get him more involved, and he needs to score more touchdowns. If he does what he did again with only 3 touchdowns last year, that's going to be a problem for your fantasy team. Moving on to Chris Carson for the Seattle Seahawks. There's a couple questions with him. Last year, he ended the season on a pretty serious injury. He had surgery, and now we do not know exactly if he's going to be back. The team says he'll be ready to go week 1, but we definitely do not know until training camps start getting started, and we see how he gets worked in. Rashad Penny still looms, obviously coming off an ACL tear, but he ate into his workload at the end of last season. If Rashad Penny comes back healthy and ready to go, he could eat into his carries again, and the team also drafted DJ Dallas. Moving on, Clyde Edwards-Helaire for the Kansas City Chiefs, their first-round draft pick. Damian Williams is still there. The team definitely said that he is their go-to running back, their number 1 running back. He will start the season for them. When does Clyde Edwards-Helaire take over the lead role? He's being drafted in the late 2nd round, and that's too early for me personally. We know he's very good. We know he's a good pass-catching back, and we know that he is definitely good on the ground. He was fantastic at LSU, but we don't know exactly. Rookies always have question marks behind them, and we know that Damian Williams is there. As long as he's healthy and playing well, it's going to be hard for Clyde just to take over that role. Melvin Gordon for the Broncos, their new star running back. Philip Lindsay's there. He could definitely eat into his workload. We don't know exactly Melvin Gordon's role in this offense. They signed him to a pretty decent deal, but we don't know the identity of this offense yet. They did draft some pass-catching weapons. They have Noah Fant. Drew Lock seems to take a step up. I think Melvin Gordon will be involved, but we don't know exactly what the workload split is going to be here. Now, fortunately, you're not paying too much for Melvin Gordon, but as running backs get drafted early, Melvin Gordon ADP probably goes a little higher than the value you should actually draft him at. Todd Gurley for the Atlanta Falcons comes over from the Los Angeles Rams, and he's pretty much the only guy in Atlanta, which is great. But this is a guy who, like Leonard Fournette, got through last season when we probably didn't expect him to because of all the injury scares we had. He was a 3rd-round pick last year when years before he finished as the number 1 running back. And obviously those injury issues are still a thing. Obviously no one's behind him on the team, but that doesn't mean that he still can't get injured if they decide to give him an insane workload on this one-year deal, which I think is very possible. The arthritis could flare up at any single moment, and he could be on your IR or off your team very quickly. Le'Veon Bell for the New York Jets. Very, very, very inefficient last year. The team drafted offensive linemen. They boosted it up, but we don't know Le'Veon Bell. We don't like him in this Adam Gase offense. He says on Twitter that he's going to be very good. Watch out for him this year. I'll believe it when I see it. Right now, I'm not the biggest Le'Veon Bell fan. We don't know what the Jets are. Sam Darnold has been inconsistent over his first couple of years in the NFL. We're still waiting for him to take that leap. And until the team, Sam Darnold and the offense takes a leap, I don't know if Le'Veon Bell takes a leap on his own. James Conner for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Injuries are all about this guy. He cannot seem to stay healthy for an entire season. After pretty much staying healthy an entire season when taking over for Le'Veon Bell during his holdout a couple years ago, James Conner, ever since then, and when he's tried to be the starting running back, it just has not worked out. Drafting him in the first round definitely hurt you last year, and now you're getting him at a discount this year. If he can stay healthy, it's going to pay dividends, but if he can't, it's going to be a headache for your team. Mark Ingram for the Baltimore Ravens. Mark Ingram, they just drafted J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State. He could definitely loom if they like what J.K. Dobbins is doing on the field. They could start to give him more carries than Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram has a connection with Lamar Jackson in that offense, just that overall pace. He's the goal line guy, but he's definitely going to be limited on the amount of touches he gets. I think he was getting 15 rushing attempts per game last year. If that goes down to somewhere around 12, that's going to eat in if he isn't so efficient on the field and scoring touchdowns. Devin Singletary, the Buffalo Bills drafted Zach Moss, and they got rid of Frank Gore, but Zach Moss, there's a lot of vacated carries for him to scoop right up. So if we wanted Devin Singletary to be the guy, but then they draft Zach Moss and he picks up probably most of those carries that Frank Gore gives up by leaving and going to the Jets. So we don't know what Devin Singletary's role is. They came out and said that they want him to do what he did last year, which is pretty much a third down guy, a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield and play, every other drive and whatnot. So we'd like to see him on the field more often. We'll just have to wait and see. Jonathan Taylor. The thing with Jonathan Taylor is he's probably the best running back prospect in this rookie group, but he's probably has the lowest amount of vacated carries because Marlon Mack's still there and Nyheim Hines are still there. So obviously, Jonathan Taylor is going to have to win this job over and completely kick Marlon Mack off the field. Nyheim Hines is going to have a role. The team has said he is their pass catching back. He's their third down guy. So Jonathan Taylor is going to have his opportunity on first and second down. But how soon does he take over the lead role, if at all? There's a risk behind Jonathan Taylor. David Johnson, new player for the Houston Texans. David Johnson comes over for the Arizona Cardinals, and in a pretty bad trade for them, they get rid of DeAndre Hopkins. David Johnson comes over. High expectations for him there, at least in the fantasy community. Carlos Hyde had a lot of carries last year. Can David Johnson, is he still that guy? Is he still the guy we saw in Arizona a few years ago, or is he as bad as he was last year? He looked very slow on the ground. We don't know what the Houston offense can do without DeAndre Hopkins as a safety blanket. Duke Johnson's still there to catch the ball out of the backfield, so David Johnson's role is limited. So another wait-and-see situation, a guy you're probably having to take a little too early. David Montgomery for the Bears. The positive for him is that they didn't draft anyone either, so the carries will be there for him, but what does Matt Nagy doing with this offense? We don't know. He did not run the ball efficiently last year as a coach. David Montgomery was decent, but he wasn't as good as we all thought he would be. And David Montgomery still has Tariq Cohen, and he is the third down back, and he's going to catch a lot of the balls out of the backfield, and David Montgomery won't be so involved. So David Montgomery is going to have a different role this year as far as the offense designing more run plays for him in the right situations. Raheem Mostert, a guy that just a few days ago has said that he wanted to be traded because he is not receiving the deal that he wants for the 49ers. Even if he plays for the 49ers, they still have Tevin Coleman. They still have Jerick McKinnon coming back. They did get rid of Matt Breida, but this is a run-first offense, which is good for Raheem Mostert. He's one of the most efficient backs in the league. He was very good down the stretch last year. If he was the only guy there, he'd probably be a second-round pick. But Raheem Mostert's been in the league for a while. Maybe we just saw some late career flashes from him, and it's possible that it's going to be a three-headed monster once again. Tevin Coleman had some pretty big games last year, so we're interested to see what Raheem Mostert's situation pans out to be. Darius Geis for the Washington football team. A guy that tore his ACL in 2018, missed the whole season, and last year battled injuries all year long, missed most of the season with some more knee injuries. Posted pictures on Twitter recently. His hamstrings are looking huge, which is great. We know this guy is talented. We want him to break out, but can he stay healthy? That is the biggest thing. It's making Adrian Peterson continue to be drafted. in fantasy football draft. So Kareem Hunt for the Cleveland Browns. We mentioned earlier with Nick Chubb. He has Nick Chubb there. Nick Chubb is going to be receiving most of the carries on this team. Kareem Hunt actually only received 43 carries in 8 games last year. Very involved in the passing game with 37 catches, but limited work on the ground, which makes you question, is he going to be able to get those goal line carries, or is Nick Chubb going to be the goal line guy? If he does not get more involved on the ground, Kareem Hunt, his ADP is definitely boosting up, and a lot of people are taking him as their RB3 on their team, maybe RB2 if they go wide receiver early, and I think there's a risk to that. DeAndre Swift for the Lions. DeAndre Swift comes in with Kerryon Johnson still there, who's battled injuries, himself, and DeAndre Swift is probably the better of the 2 running backs, but it's going to be a split there. They have Kenny Golladay, they have Matt Stafford, they have Marvin Jones. It's a pass-first offense, and this team hasn't produced a 1,000-yard rusher in years. We don't even know how many years. Reggie Bush, 2013 or 2011, somewhere back then. The upside for him in year 1, I don't really see it unless Kerryon Johnson gets injured again and DeAndre Swift have some blow-up games and they just decide to fade Kerryon Johnson out of the offense. Cam Akers for the Los Angeles Rams. Cam Akers comes into this offense being drafted with Darrell Henderson still there and Malcolm Brown. Not much of a competition, but definitely we want to know what Darrell Henderson is. We don't know what he is. What if the team got rid of Todd Gurley because they like Darrell Henderson? Now, obviously, they invested a lot into Cam Akers in the draft, so he will have his equal opportunity to be the lead running back in this team. But we do not know yet, and the questions are looming. So once we see him maybe on Hard Knocks and see a little more training camp, maybe we can get a little better question. But right now, it's a risk taking Cam Akers as your RB2 on your team. I see him go pretty early in best ball drafts. Sony Michel. This guy has battled injuries every single year of his career on the Patriots. The Patriots like to feature tons of running backs. We don't know what the Patriots are without Tom Brady. All of those questions add up to a risky pick in Sony Michel. Now, you're not taking him that early, so it's not that big of a deal. James White's going in front of him. But Sony Michel is definitely limited to the ground game, and if he can't stay healthy, he's not there to get carries on the ground or receive those touchdown carries. So Damian Williams, we talked about him earlier. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, seems like we talked about him such a long time ago, was going way earlier in drafts. Damian Williams is still there. I said he's going to be the guy, but also he's had trouble with injuries. They took Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first round. They must either have an issue with Damian Williams as far as relying on him to stay on the field, or they just don't think he's as good and they like the upside of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and maybe CEH gets phased in as the top running back just after 1 or 2 weeks. Definitely can happen. Teams are definitely going to defend their guys, their veteran guys, throughout the offseason. But hey, once training camp's here and once the first week of the season's here, it's anyone's game. If Marlon Mack for the Indianapolis Colts, we talked about it with Jonathan Taylor. There's a lot of guys here. They obviously have a fantastic offensive line, and Marlon Mack, when he's been on the field, has been great. But this is a guy that has battled injuries. If he goes down with an injury and Jonathan Taylor steps up and has some big games, Marlon Mack could be out of this offense for good. Kerryon Johnson for the Lions, we mentioned earlier with DeAndre Swift. It's going to be a split here, and Kerryon Johnson has had injury issues in his career. We had so much, there was so much upside for him in his first couple years in the NFL, but he just hasn't been able to stay on the field that the team has had to go out and draft one of the best prospects this year, definitely for rookie running backs, in DeAndre Swift. And if DeAndre Swift comes out, takes over that role, I think they're not even going to look back, and they're going to put Kerryon Johnson in a very minimal role, and DeAndre Swift will be the guy. Ronald Jones II for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the thing with Ronald Jones is that the team drafted Keyshawn Vaughn. If other teams like the Bears who had David Montgomery and didn't draft a running back, that's good news. He's going to continue to get the carries. But Ronald Jones, they must not like what he's doing and how he's developing in Tampa Bay because they drafted Keyshawn Vaughn. A lot of people are picking him as a breakout pick this year, Ronald Jones. But I think his time has come and gone. Running backs' careers can be short in the NFL. And if Keyshawn Vaughn comes in and plays very well, Ronald Jones could be on the bench. Matt BREIDA, new addition to the Miami Dolphins, comes over from the 49ers, and we just do not know what this offense is yet. Obviously, they drafted Tua. They have Ryan Fitzpatrick there right now until Tua is ready to go. They have Devontae Parker. They probably want to pass first. The offensive line has a lot of rookies on it, and Jordan Howard is there, who a lot of people are projecting to be the number one back and most likely the goal line back. Now, Matt BREIDA is very good, but we do not know what this offense is going to be. So take your risk taking Matt BREIDA late in leagues, and hopefully it can pay in return. James White for the Patriots. James White going much before Sony Michel, but probably going to get a lot more involvement with Cam Newton in town. Probably going to be dumping passes off to him. Probably being his little Christian McCaffrey. Obviously not as good as Christian McCaffrey, but hey, a guy that can get a lot of work in this offense, which just took a huge step up now that Jared Stidham is not their quarterback. So James White, not much of a risk, but hey, if Sony Michel is healthy all year and he steals a lot of those goal line carries, and maybe Cam Newton decides to get a lot of these receivers like N'Keal Harry involved and whatnot, or the team just doesn't have much of an identity with Cam Newton, they don't transition well from Brady to Newton, James White could take a hit. Philip Lindsay for the Broncos, obviously they brought in Melvin Gordon. We mentioned it earlier. He's going to steal a lot of Philip Lindsay's workload. We had high hopes for Philip Lindsay last year. Did pretty good as the number one running back, not as good as the year before in his rookie season, but Philip Lindsay was okay last year. But Melvin Gordon's there, and Melvin Gordon can do a lot of work in the passing game, and Philip Lindsay actually hasn't been that great in the passing game, which a lot of people just want to kind of throw him in that third down role, and I don't know if that really, bodes well for him. I think I could see Philip Lindsay getting a very reduced role now that Melvin Gordon's in town. If Melvin Gordon plays well, look out. Philip Lindsay could be on the bench. And Jordan Howard for the Miami Dolphins. We mentioned Matt Breida. Him and Matt Breida have a split. Now, I see Jordan Howard being the goal line guy, but we don't know. What if Matt Breida takes off? He's one of the fastest players in the NFL with very good breakaway speed. And if Jordan Howard, isn't playing very well in that team behind that offensive line and Matt Breida is succeeding, they could definitely flip-flop roles, and I could see Matt Breida getting a 70% workload over 30% Jordan Howard. It's possible. Keyshawn Vaughn for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We just mentioned it with Ronald Jones. He comes in and gets drafted, which is great. Ronald Jones is still there, though. A lot of people are projecting him as a breakout guy this year, which there's just a lot of questions here with two guys that seem to have equal value right now in drafts. It's tough to take your pick on these guys, similar to Matt Breida and Jordan Howard. You want to pick the right guy, and hopefully it works out for you. So that was the video. That's a reason to fade every single running back in fantasy football drafts this year. If you're new to the channel, why don't you sub to the channel, because we would really appreciate it. Like this video. It helps us grow. Drop a comment below on what running back you're fading this year. We will respond to every single comment. Until next time, we appreciate you listening.